Super Grandmaster Parham Maghsoodloo opens this Title Tuesday game with c4 against Georgios, better known as Germany's biggest chess YouTuber, the Big Greek. Knight f6. Knight c3, Georgios plays d6, clearly hinting at his favorite setup. The Big Greek loves to play the King's Indian defense against pretty much everything. White has a few solid choices for the next move, like pushing the pawn to d4 to grab the center, or knight f3. Parham goes for the most principled approach, striking in the center with d4. Now black is perfectly set up to continue with the King's Indian plan, usually by playing g6 to prepare the bishop fianchetto, or maybe e5 to strike back immediately. And there's g6, confirming the King's Indian defense is officially on the board. White has a massive center, and black is going to try to tear it down later. For white's next move, the classical main line is knight to f3, but pushing e4 to build an absolute pawn wall is also incredibly popular. But Parham plays f4, going for an incredibly aggressive setup. This is a completely wild variation, where white throws their pawns forward to suffocate black. Black's main response here is usually bishop g7 to finally get that piece developed and put pressure on the dark squares. Black places the bishop on g7, aiming down the long diagonal. White brings the knight to f3, black castles, tucking the king away safely. White pushes the g-pawn to prepare to fianchetto their own bishop. I'm actually not a huge fan of this move, since pushing the e-pawn to grab center space was definitely the more testing option. Black pushes the c-pawn, challenging white's center immediately. White responds by pushing the d-pawn forward to clamp down on the position. Black pushes the e-pawn, immediately asking questions of white's advanced pawn. White continues with their plan and puts the bishop on g2. Black takes the pawn on d5, resolving the tension in the center. White recaptures with the c-pawn. Black swings the rook over to e8, marking our transition into a very tense middle game. White castles. Black pushes the a-pawn, keeping enemy pieces out of the b5 square. White mirrors this with a pawn push to a4. This completely locks down the queenside structure and prevents black from expanding. Black moves the bishop to g4, putting pressure on the knight. White drops the knight back to d2. Black brings their queenside knight to d7. They spent over 30 seconds calculating this move. The knight settles right in front of the queen. This is actually a massive blunder, stepping right into a trap. It would have been much better to jump the other knight to h5 instead. White instantly spots a huge issue and pushes the h-pawn. This asks the bishop on g4 where it wants to go. Because the black knight just blocked the bishop's retreat, the bishop is suddenly very short on squares. The bishop slides back to h5. White slides the rook over to e1. They spent 24 seconds here, deciding to play it safe. While I think it would be stronger to jump the knight to c4, white maintains a completely winning position. Black places the rook on c8. White drops the knight back to f1. They spent 4 seconds here. The engine was screaming for a different approach, like moving the knight to c4, as this retreat completely gives away white's remaining advantage. Black pushes the c-pawn, looking for counterplay. White brings the knight to h2. They invested 17 seconds on the clock. The evaluation swings completely, handing the advantage over to black. I think developing the bishop to e3 was definitely the way to go here. Look at this pawn skeleton right here. It tells the entire story of the position. See that? We have this super asymmetrical pawn formation, but my eyes are instantly drawn to white's advanced pawn on d5, and black's backward pawn on d6. This specific structure completely cramps black for space and creates a massive permanent weakness. White just needs to slowly pile up the pressure on that weak d-pawn until it finally collapses. Master these pawn structures, and the winning plans will literally just jump out at you. Black plays the queen to b6 with a check, and black immediately gives the advantage right back. They spent nearly half a minute calculating this, but bringing the queen out here is just entirely the wrong plan. It allows white to easily consolidate their position. Let's look at a better variation. Black could have played the tricky pawn to b5, so white would capture on b5, and black could recapture on b5. This would look much better. Okay, now let's get back to the game. White simply slides the king into the corner to h1. Black jumps the knight to c5. A bit of an inaccuracy, sliding the queen to f2 would have kept white under more pressure. White pushes the g-pawn, finally trapping that poor bishop on h5. This is exactly why piece awareness is so important, as black has absolutely no way to save the piece. Black jumps the knight to b3, creating an immediate threat to capture the rook on a1. White just slides the rook over to b1, calmly stepping out of the knight's crosshairs and preventing the capture. Black places the queen on f2, trying to stir up some chaos. White pushes the e-pawn, grabbing space and solidifying their grip on the center. Black trades their knight for the bishop on c1. White recaptures with the queen. Now you might be wondering, wait, why didn't they just take on c1 with the rook? Well, if they had grabbed it with the rook, the black queen would just swing over and snatch the free pawn on f4. So yeah, that's why they had to capture with the queen instead. Black swings the queen over to h4, setting up a tricky idea to capture the pawn on g4 with their bishop. White brings the queen back to d1, fortifying their position and stopping that tricky bishop capture on g4. Black pushes the g-pawn, desperately trying to open things up. White captures the pawn with their f-pawn, now threatening to just take the knight on f6. Black recaptures with the queen, saving the knight while also preparing to drop their trapped bishop back to g6. White takes the trapped bishop on h5 with the g-pawn, stopping its escape to g6. They finally cash in on that trap from earlier, securing a clean material advantage. Black recaptures with the knight, white brings the knight to e2, black places the bishop on e5. White brings the knight to f3, immediately threatening to capture the black queen. Black jumps the knight to g3 with check, forcing white to react before they can grab the queen. White captures the knight with their own knight. Black recaptures with the queen. White captures the bishop on e5, happily simplifying the position since they are up material, and setting up a nasty queen check on g4. Black takes back with the rook. White plays the queen to g4 with check. This forces a queen trade, which is exactly what you want to do when you have a material advantage. Black accepts the trade and takes the queen. White recaptures with the h-pawn. Now we enter an endgame where white is up a full minor piece. It should be a matter of pure technique from here. White just needs to consolidate and trade down further, while black is desperately fighting to create some sort of fortress. Black pushes the b-pawn. White captures the pawn on b5. Black recaptures with their a-pawn. White slides the rook to a1. Black pushes the b-pawn forward. White brings the rook up to a6, putting pressure on black's weak d-pawn. Black pushes the c-pawn, trying to create a dangerous pass pawn as a last resort, threatening to capture on b2. White just captures the pawn with their b-pawn, easily shutting down that pass pawn threat. Black recaptures with their pawn. White takes the pawn on d6 with the rook. With this capture, white easily handles black's only counterplay while remaining up a full piece, effectively ending black's last hopes of resistance and wrapping up the game. What a fascinating game! It perfectly illustrates how getting your pieces tangled up can lead to a completely lost position, especially when your opponent calmly cashes in on the advantage. Let me know in the comments if you spotted the trapped bishop idea. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chess recaps, and I'll see you in the next video.